One way to improve your photography during acquisition is understanding composition. And that is how you take all the elements you have in your frame and put them together in your design of what's going on. My name is Eric Young, and I'm with UTADV, and I'm here to give you some tips and tricks on how to go through and improve your ADV or moto camping photography. So let's start off with one of the basic rules of photography, this idea of the rule of thirds. And what that means is if you took a tic-tac-toe grid and put it over your viewfinder or over your screen on your camera on your iPhone, it might look something like this. And you see two vertical lines and two horizontal lines. And any place that those lines might intersect become areas of interest within your photograph. So here, this is when I laid my bike down at Sainsbury Island. Um, I've placed the bike itself down the lower right-hand intersection, or at least part of that there, and then had the rest go through and complete the frame within that. In fact, I've got a nice leading road there, a line that brings us up into that, and then I have a horizontal line up at the top that also becomes complementary. So that rule of thirds just breaks down your frame. It gives you places to go through and compose uh, people, your ride, your tent, your geographical features, whatever it is you have going on within your image, and it makes it more interesting. It pulls things out of the middle. Anything framed up right smack dab in the center becomes static, and unless you have some lines leading to it, it becomes rather uninteresting. So this gives you some negative space to work with if you want to put in any kind of titling information in there, or if you want to use this as a Facebook banner or put it on a YouTube banner as well. It gives you something to work with in terms of composing within the rule of thirds, how it breaks it down into vertical thirds or horizontal thirds. Again, putting anything on the axis of where those intersect, and using the horizontal or vertical lines for your natural horizons or your or vertical structures like trees or buildings, whatever the case might be. Here's another image, and you can see now how the rule of thirds is used within that. All right, with the top line being the line that bisects the desert and the mountain in the background, and then how the motorcycle goes through and falls onto that intersection of the tic-tac-toe grid on the upper left-hand side. But I'm using this image to go through and introduce another compositional influence called lines. And that has to do with lines included within our composition. We have actually three very strong lines going on here, but two in particular. The one that's created by the tires of the motorcycle itself that leads up into that, and that gets us a diagonal line. Diagonal lines have more energy than vertical lines or horizontal lines in that respect. And then we have another horizontal line going right to left that also draws our attention to the bike. So lines within any image are going to lead the eye through it, like the road in this image here. This is on the Cottonwood Highway near the Coxcomb section, just north of Kanab. And looking back south on this, the road and the coxcomb itself goes through and pulls your eye on a z-axis from front to back as far as this image is concerned. And that's the power of lines within your composition. Next is this concept of frame forces. The whole frame around the image, like the frame that is around this presentation, they're like big magnets, and they have a tendency to draw anything closer to them that might be close to them to begin with. So, like the motorcycle in this frame, the Triumph is what we call crowding the frame. This creates a little bit of psychological noise. The bike doesn't have any place to go. There's a little bit of tension that's going on with that. If we were to move the bike to the other side of the frame, it creates what's called leading or leading, depending on where you're from. That lead room gives then the machine some space to go into, to actually move into, even though the bike is static. What's interesting about this Triumph is, and like any motorcycle really, is it has an index quality to it. It's pointing in a direction. We know that there's a front and a rear to this that way, but if everything were equal on this in terms of the size of the tires and the wheels and it was symmetrical in terms of its construction, the beak alone of this gives it an indexing quality to it, meaning it's pointing in a certain direction. So that feeds into the psychology of frame forces, how we go through and put that into the frame. And again, you see the rule of thirds here at work. The bike itself is framed mostly with the water behind it in terms of where I stood to go through and put a background in behind that. We call that a figure-ground relationship, which we might talk about in another video. Um, Ideally, we're going to fill the frame, have a little bit of lead room going on, and I like to see a 3/4 going on, either from the back or from the front. If we can see the headlights on a motorcycle or on a vehicle are like the eyes on a face and in portraiture, and they give us uh, that catch light, that character. It makes it come a little bit more alive if we can see the headlights as opposed to when we can't. They don't have to be on necessarily, which is another technique involved in that. But anyway, you see what's going on. So frame force is here, a little bit tighter. The bike is down in the lower left-hand intersection of the rule of thirds and comes into its composition that way. One last element I want to get into has to do with the kind of lenses that you're using or the focal length that you're using. Now, if you're using a smartphone, you have the ability to zoom in and out with that as well. Understand, though, that that's done digitally, meaning that there's no lens shift happening within your phone. Some newer phones, have two different lenses, a wide angle and a semi-telephoto lens, and gives you a choice between those two. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of focal length. Here on this image, I'm using a semi-telephoto lens. It's a 58mm lens, 1.4, that's mounted on my Fujifilm XM1. And what that's doing for me within this image here is it's giving me compression, meaning that Stansbury Island out on the distance there actually looks closer than it actually is. Okay, it compresses the image. And then I have the water and the blocks with the bike there in foreground. I have a figure-ground relationship going on within that. So that gives us an entirely different perspective than, say, this image, which is shot wide angle. Same island, same lake, okay? Almost the same position where I took this image, but you can see the wide angle nature of this goes through and it really changes kind of the whole editorial feel of what's going on. I'm going to toggle that back and forth one more time. So here's the semi-telephoto giving us that compression, and then the wide angle. See what a difference that makes in how we go through and give context to that image? Well, I hope these help you out. Be sure to go through, and if you would, to visit the blog, UTADV, UTADV at WordPress.com, and keep an eye out, more of these tutorials to come.